Hi, I welcome you in Module 2. I hope you've set your goals for the course and are eager to start absorbing information. In this lesson, we're going to figure out who a truck dispatcher really is and what functions they perform. We begin our training with the very basics and will gradually move on to more and more highly specialized information. Complexity of the information will be constantly increasing, so it is most important to build a quality foundation of general knowledge. So, who is a truck dispatcher in the United States? In the trucking industry, a lot depends on reliable drivers, and they're usually considered the backbone of the system. But they're not the only employees responsible for its success. Dispatchers also play a crucial role, and they're in great demand. In the classic worldview, a dispatcher's job is to schedule drivers to pick up and deliver freight to customers or suppliers. But in the US, that's just the beginning. In America, most transportation companies operate on a for-hire basis. Accordingly, they don't work on long-term contracts transporting goods for the same client along the same routes, but offer their services for sale and carry those goods with those clients who offer the most profitable deal. These truckers often travel all over the country and are constantly chasing the highest profits. The task of planning the most profitable route and making the most profitable deals with clients and freight brokers falls in the hands of the dispatcher. Therefore, it depends on the dispatcher how much profit the transportation company will make, and if it will make any at all. Do you feel the level of responsibility this job entails? Well, based on the above, we can write down the main areas of responsibility of a truck dispatcher. First, analysis of the freight market and selection of the most profitable routes. As a result of the analysis, a dispatcher must draw up a weekly route plan for all his trucks, taking into account the financial and operational goals of the trucking company. Second, negotiate rates directly with customers and freight brokers. A dispatcher must be able to negotiate price of transportation, bargain, and convince the broker to give the desired cargo to his company. Third, booking of freight and document management. Working with documents is not the main responsibility of the dispatcher. Usually it takes only about 10 to 15% of the overall working time. However, all the documentation should always be double-checked and filled in correctly. Fourth, coordinating drivers and controlling their work schedule. And fifth, accounting and billing for transportation services to customers of the transport company. At this point, we're starting to realize a dispatcher is not actually just a dispatcher. He's the key part of the entire company. What does a typical dispatcher do all day? Well, first, he sits down at the work desk, analyzes the market, and selects options for the most profitable routes for the week for all of his trucks. Then, according to the plan, he begins to call brokers on their load offers and negotiates prices. Once he finds a suitable load, he starts closing the deal, filling out the paperwork, checking the contracts and insurance. Once everything is filled out, it's time to coordinate the drivers, to decide who will start moving at what time, when they can deliver, when they need to take a break, etc. So, once again, a dispatcher is the key part of the entire company. If a company didn't make enough money this month, well, the dispatcher is responsible. If drivers are constantly late, the dispatcher is responsible. If paperwork is filled out incorrectly, then once again, that's a dispatcher's oversight. But don't be alarmed here. I'm not trying to get you scared. Instead, think about how much demand there is for good professional dispatchers in America, in one of the largest industries in the world. In the industry where hundreds, sometimes even thousands, of new trucking companies are registered every single day. In an age of globalization where working from home has become the norm, when hiring foreign employees remotely has become an opportunity to cut costs. It is now that this profession is in the most demand, and with the expected growth of the market, will be even more in demand in a year, in 5 years, and even in 20 years. Many people ask me before taking the training, they say, Dmitry, you're telling us that the American trucking companies hire dispatchers remotely? Why don't they just hire dispatchers in their own country and in their own city and sit them down in an office? Well, I want to dispel this myth at the very start, so that we can begin to study in peace. I will provide a number of simple arguments that basically and logically explain this phenomenon. Firstly, 80% of all transportation companies on the market are small companies with a fleet of 1 up to 10 trucks. These are the companies that constitute the main target market of individual remote dispatchers and dispatching services. The majority of these companies simply don't even have their own office, where you might think they would place their dispatchers. They don't need an office. They aren't going to pay money for it. These companies are usually registered to the owner's home address, so unless if you don't expect your employer to invite you to work at his house, put those thoughts to rest. Second, hiring a dispatcher located in the US is by an order of magnitude more expensive than hiring one overseas. The average salary in the US is about $4,000 a month, and the cost of living is about $2,500. For small companies with just one or even a couple of trucks, hiring an office worker is an unaffordable and totally illogical expense. I also mentioned that you can get a job at a large company, right? What about them? By hiring dispatchers in the US, companies not only spend money on inflated salaries for their citizens, but also pay payroll taxes, which hurt their pockets. Because a large company with a couple of hundred trucks need to have at least, well, a few dozen dispatchers. By hiring dispatchers remotely, companies can lower their tax rate, or by hiring dispatch services as contractors, accordingly writing off dispatch costs as an expense. Recently, we've been getting more and more inquiries from large companies looking to outsource their whole dispatch department overseas. Okay, to summarize, we learned that a dispatcher's job is to analyze the market, find freight, negotiate with brokers, fill out freight documentation, coordinate drivers, take care of invoicing, and keep operating records in order. We also learned that a dispatcher is a critical component of a transportation company. The demand for qualified dispatchers is extremely high, and hiring a remote dispatcher is a winning practice for a transportation company located in the United States. In the next lessons in this module, we will explore the other players in the trucking industry, how they cooperate with each other, and also learn the types of equipment a dispatcher can work with. Hey, welcome back! In this lesson we're going to break down the US trucking industry piece by piece. Sit back, enjoy, and don't forget to take notes. First, let's look at the stakeholder structure, which is the structure of the industry broken down into the hierarchical relationships of the major players, or so-called stakeholders. We will begin with the stakeholders who own the freight that is being transported. A shipper is a company or individual who needs to transport the cargo, and a receiver is a business or individual who needs to receive the cargo. Simple enough. Good examples of shippers are such companies as Confer, one of the largest timber producer in the nation, or Evans Fruit Company, a major producer of fresh fruits. A shipper can be any business associated with absolutely any product. It could be a factory, a farm, plantation, importer, processor, and so on. A good example of a receiver could be Walmart, the largest chain of supermarkets in the United States. At the same time, Confer and Evans Fruit Company are also examples of receivers. As large manufacturers, they not only ship, but they also need to receive large quantities of goods. Together, shippers and receivers are called freight owners. Of course, there are transportation companies that work directly with freight owners on a contract basis. However, deals with large customers are mostly only available to large carriers because of the very large volume. Small carriers can also work directly with shippers, for example, by getting a contract from a small factory or a farm located in the same city or district as the carrier. However, small companies often go the other way. Instead of contracting with one or more customers directly, they take the goods from freight brokers. Let's talk about them. A freight broker is a business or individual who matches freight owners with trucking companies in order to organize and facilitate the movement of freight. Freight brokers are licensed to arrange transportation within the United States. They work for the shipper or the receiver and should not be confused with a dispatcher or a trucking company. A brokerage company doesn't need to own its own trucks. They provide a service to the shipper to find suitable carriers and make profit on the difference between how much money they got from the customer and how much they paid the trucking company. For example, a broker negotiated a price of $1,100 to ship imported mangoes from Miami to Jacksonville, Florida. He then found a carrier willing to move this load for $900. The remaining $200 difference is the profit the broker can put in his pocket. So, why do shippers and carriers work with brokers? Well, first of all, as we already discussed, it doesn't make sense for a large shipper to work with small trucking companies because they wouldn't be able to cover the entire volume of freight. They would have to hire employees to work for them who would essentially do what brokers do: select and supervise large number of small trucking companies as contractors. In that case, if the shipper doesn't want to deal with brokers and also doesn't want to spend money on additional full-time employees in the logistics department, they need to look for large transportation companies in their area that can cover their whole volume. Again, this will prove to be a difficult task. It's not certain that the right large company will be found and that their services will even be cheaper than through a broker. And if the transportation company doesn't meet its obligations, the shipper is again faced with problems. Working through a broker is easier for them. If the truck assigned to the shipper breaks down or can't come to the pickup for any other reason, the broker will sit down and look for another truck. The shipper gets security and delegates most of the potential logistics problems onto the broker. Some brokerage companies also have their own trucks. Such brokers are called asset-based brokers, which literally means broker that owns assets. Such brokers cover part of the orders with their own trucks and the rest with trucks of other carriers and earn here and there. Unlike dispatchers, which are in fact hired employees or contractors of the trucking company, brokers are separate players in the market. The US market for freight brokers is super competitive. It's dominated by the big players who invest millions of dollars annually in marketing, sales, data gathering, and market analysis. Small players or new brokers, especially those who are coming in from scratch and don't have their own trucks and established customers, have a very hard time in this industry. While becoming a dispatcher and finding your first customers can be done in a matter of weeks, finding a shipper who wants to work with a new brokerage company and beat the competition on pricing in today's realities is incredibly difficult and sometimes can take years. Transportation brokers are the companies that dispatchers work with directly to find freight for their trucks. It's important to get the idea right. The broker is not your client or employer. Your client is the transportation company, the carrier, the one who owns the trucks you dispatch. The broker is one from whom you get the freight. In fact, this is another player in the market with whom you will need to constantly cooperate. You can't live without each other, but your interests are not exactly the same. The broker wants to sell the cargo to the carrier at a cheaper price in order to pocket as much difference as possible. And the dispatcher, just like the transportation company he works for, wants to take the cargo at a higher price to make more money. That's essentially the whole game of the market. Remember our previous example of a load Miami to Jacksonville for which the broker got $1,100 and paid the carrier $900. If the carrier had a good dispatcher who knows the market well and is good at negotiation, he could have bargained with the broker and booked the same load for $1,000 instead of $900. Well, good negotiation is key for a dispatcher. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We still have one more important stakeholder to look at. Transportation or trucking companies. In the American market, they're commonly referred to as motor carriers or just carriers. These are companies that own trucks and have a license to transport goods across the United States. This includes the dispatcher. We do not distinguish dispatchers as separate stakeholders, since they're employees of the trucking company or, in the case of remote dispatch, contractors. Motor carriers in the US are divided into several categories depending on the type of license, the motor carrier authority that they possess. Contract carrier versus common carrier. A contract carrier is a transportation company that serves specific customers. Contract carriers do not transport goods for the general public. They work only for organizations or firms with which they have a contract. Very often, contract carriers are engaged in transportation of non-standard cargo with specialized equipment. For example, transportation of compressed gas in tankers. Common carriers is a commercial enterprise which transports goods or people from one place to another. As dispatchers will focus on transportation goods, so will not get involved with transportation of people. Common carriers typically own standard, non-specialized equipment which is suitable for movement of a large variety of goods. An example of such equipment is a truck with a refrigerated trailer, a reefer. This trailer is almost always of standard size and is suitable for transportation of any type of chilled or frozen goods, whether it's fruit, meat, or ice cream. Most carriers on the market are common carriers, and they're primary customer or employer of a remote dispatcher. By focusing on common carriers, we can divide them into two more subcategories: interstate common carriers versus intrastate common carriers. This part is quite simple. Intrastate means within a state. Interstate, from the word inter, means between states. Most dispatchers work with interstate carriers, as they are the ones who need a good dispatcher the most. The dispatcher who will analyze the market and move their trucks on the highest paying routes. However, there is nothing wrong with working with an intrastate carrier. Yes, you have to understand that such companies travel fewer miles, have lower gross revenues, and it's not always easy to find loads for them because you're limited to loads that are within the same states. On the other hand, by working with the same state, you will have a very deep understanding of freight demand and pricing, which will make you an expert at working in that region and can serve as a great value proposition when looking for other customers in the same area. When I first started my journey as a dispatcher and worked with my first carrier, all of his trucks only worked in the state of Florida, although his license allowed him to travel outside of it. Within a year, I had become a Florida guru. I knew the reasons for freight pricing in each area, personally knew every broker, I knew when fruits will come from Latin America and when the price of shipment of flowers from Miami would begin to rise actively. With that knowledge, I had no trouble finding other Florida carriers and convincing them that I knew my business and could be of great service for them. Okay, we're not done. Here are two more subcategories that common carriers can be divided into. Common carrier of household goods and common carrier of property except household goods. The first one, common carrier of household goods. Transportation companies that fall into this category are authorized as a carrier to accept payments from the public for the transportation of household goods. The definition of household goods includes anything used in the home, such as furniture or appliances. Items purchased by customers from a store or a factory that they ask to have delivered to their home are most often included in this category. The homeowner pays for the transportation costs incurred in the delivery. These movers usually work with the public rather than businesses. They help with moves or make home deliveries. They usually advertise their services offline or online on specialized websites and do not need the service of a remote dispatcher that much. Such carriers are not an ideal potential customer or employer of ours. The second one, common carrier of property. This status gives companies the right to become hired carriers of goods regulated by the US government, except household goods. These are the carriers we're really interested in. They carry all standard types of goods except household goods. Whether it's wood, building materials, fruit, meat, plastic, supermarket carts, whatever. This type of carrier works with businesses, legal entities, the very shippers and receivers who hire brokers through whom we will book the shipments from. They carry bulk goods in large volumes. Whether it's within state or across the country, these are the carriers that need your services so badly. Alright, welcome. In the previous lesson we discussed the major players in the trucking market: shipper, receiver, broker, and motor carrier. Now it's time to talk about the types of equipment. Usually dispatchers work with large 18-wheeler trucks with different types of trailers. In the US there are 8 classes of trucks that vary in shape and size. In this course our main focus is on working with the 8s, the largest class. Outside of the USA, these are often called 20-ton trucks, because they can carry roughly 20 tons or 20,000 kilos of product. A 20-ton truck is referred to as a semi-truck, and a trailer attached to it is called a semi-trailer. A truck without a trailer is called power-only, probably because that's where the engine and the driver are located, and those are the two that make the truck move in the right direction. Today, due to high prices and shortages of trailers, a very large number of companies work with this type of equipment. Instead of loading cargo in their own trailer, they pick up already loaded trailers, attach them to their power only, and transport them to their destination. A great customer example for this type of equipment is a company we all know, Amazon. They own a huge number of trailers and hire small companies to move them. Now, let's touch on the trailers. There are hundreds of types and subtypes of trailers on America's roads, each with its own specifications. But fortunately, we only need to study a few for our work, because these trailers are the most common and they're used by common carriers which we work with. A carrier who purchases a specialized or rare type of trailer is most likely doing it for a particular customer or a particular type of cargo with which he plans to work. Often such carriers already have contracts with customers and will most likely not need a remote dispatcher to choose routes and search for freight. Conversely, buying a standard type of trailer, the carrier is most likely planning to transport a large number of various goods and work with brokers. Respectively, he will need your services. Let's take a look at the main types of trailers. First, dry van is a fully enclosed box designed for the safe and reliable transportation of a wide range of goods. Practically any product can be transported in a dry van. Food and beverages on pallets, consumer electronics, building materials, plastic and plastic containers, supermarket carts, window frames, in general anything that can fit in it. The dry van's hard walls and roof provide excellent protection for the cargo from outside environment, and inside, the cargo can be secured in many different ways to avoid damage when accelerating and stopping the truck. This is why the dry van is the most common type of trailer in the United States. Let's take a look at the basic characteristics of a standard dry van. Length, 53 feet. Yes, in the USA they use feet, not meters. 1 foot is about 0.3 meters. Most standard dry vans are 53 feet long, but you can find smaller, 48-foot long ones. They are not always accepted for loading because they only hold 24 pallets, while the 53-footer holds 26 pallets. In general, most of the loads you will encounter in the market will be specifically assembled and packed for standard trailer types. Respectively, any deviations should always be discussed in advance, so as not to get into a conflicted situation at the loading point. If you ask the owner of a standard dry van what kind of equipment they have, you will often hear a phrase, "I got a 53 van." They won't even bother to say the word foot or talk about the width or the height of the trailer, because it will be obvious to everyone that they have a standard dry van. Height, 12.5 to 13.6 feet. Rarely plays a role in cargo booking and is usually never discussed. We're not going to elaborate on it at all. Standard width, 8.6 feet. Trailer weight, 14 to 17,000 pounds. Weight is measured in pounds in the US. In writing, they use the letters LBS for pounds. You need to remember that. If you see LBS, remember that's a measure of weight. 1 pound equals about 0.45 kilograms. Maximum load weight is between 43 to 45,000 pounds. Of course, in the US there are restrictions on the maximum weight of a loaded vehicle on the road. The total weight of the truck, along with the trailer and the freight, is 80,000 pounds. Accordingly, there is not exact maximum load weight, because it will always depend on how much the truck and the trailer weigh. Generally, newer trucks as well as trailers weigh less, and you can load all 45,000 pounds in them. But still, this information should always be clarified before you start working with a new carrier. Roll door versus swing door. In the roll door trailer, the door goes up and down, like a shutter, while the swing door opens like a gate. The swing door is the standard on the market, and many roll door trailers are not suitable for a standard full truck load. This is due to the placement of the load in the trailer and the maximum weight that can be put on each axle of the truck. The swing door trailer is designed to maximize your cargo space. Now for the types of freight. Categories of freight which are transported in dry vans. First, palletized, carried on standard 48 by 40 inch pallets. For example, bottled water that goes to a supermarket. The water is first packed in boxes, which are then put on pallets. Next freight category is floor-loaded. That's when a product is loaded directly onto the floor of the trailer without any pallets. For example, car tires or carpets usually will not be put on pallets. These products don't get damaged and also don't damage the trailer floor, so there's no specific need for pallets. They'll just take up space and extra weight. And the third freight type is bulk loaded. That's when a load is dumped into a trailer, for example when transporting fresh unwrapped potatoes or hay. A dump truck is a much better specialized alternative for bulk loads, but they can be transported in a dry van as well. Now, for the load security. As we mentioned earlier, a dry van protects the load from external factors, such as snow or rain, with its walls and roof. Inside the van, the load has to be secured properly, so there is no damage caused by moving around when suddenly pulling over or accelerating. Let's look at examples. E-truck. The E-truck is long rails of 12-gauge high-tensile steel with multiple anchor points to support various types of strapping equipment. Elastic straps are used to secure loads and to prevent pallets from sliding. Load locks are used in the trucking industry to secure loads during transport. They're basically rods with ratcheting mechanisms inside and are usually made of steel or aluminum. And finally, dunnage bags. These are heavy-duty inflatable bags that help stabilize and secure cargo. Now, let's move on to the next, very similar trailer type. Reefer, or refrigerated trailer, is a trailer that is used to transport perishable goods and other temperature-sensitive goods. The first refrigerated trailer appeared in the ice cream industry back in 1925. It's essentially the same as the dry van, only with a refrigeration unit. Here are some characteristics. Length 48 to 53 feet, just as with the dry van, size 53 is standard and 48 is not common and can carry a couple pallets less. Height 12.5 to 13.6, width 8.6 feet, same as dry van. Trailer weight 14 to 17,000 pounds, again the same. Refrigerating unit weight is about 2,000 pounds on average. And maximum load weight is from 42 to 45,000 pounds. Again, there is no exact maximum weight as trucks, trailers and reefers can vary slightly in weight. Plus, it may depend on the amount of fuel in the tank of both the truck itself and the refrigeration unit. Making sure the truck is not overloaded is a driver's job. The dispatcher just needs to know and understand these parameters when negotiating the load. Talking about temperature control. Typically, the refrigeration unit can hold the temperature inside the trailer from -20 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit. This is equivalent to -28 to 18 degrees Celsius. After feet, pounds and inches, it's no surprise that Americans count temperature on a different scale too. But don't worry, you don't have to sit down and memorize all these units of measurement. When you talk to your broker about the load, he will tell you what temperature the driver has to set on the reefer unit. Here are a few examples so you can start to get an understanding of temperature settings. Ice cream is transported at -15 degrees Fahrenheit, frozen pork at 0, avocado at 38, and watermelons typically go at 45 Fahrenheit. Reefer is a great type of trailer for experienced drivers. Transporting refrigerated foods carries higher risks, and with that comes higher profit. Prices for temperature control transportation are typically from 20 to 50% higher than dry van freight. In addition, some loads that can be loaded in a dry van will also work for the reefer. And the third standard type of trailer is flatbed. Flatbed is an open flat platform trailer with no roofs or wall. It's mainly used for transporting heavy, oversized, wide and unstable loads such as machinery, agricultural equipment, large construction materials, or, for example, iron coils. The flat shape of the trailer's body makes loading and unloading goods much easier, because heavy objects can be put on top of the platform using a loading crane. Here's a walkthrough of the features. Length from 48 to 53 feet, Flatbeds come in a variety of sizes because the equipment is so versatile, but speaking of standard trailers transported with semi-trucks, they're 48 or 53 feet long. Unlike dry vans and reefers where you generally only work with 53 feet, 40-foot flatbeds are pretty common and will always be accepted for standard size cargo. Maximum load weight is 48,000 pounds. The trailer itself weighs less due to lack of walls and ceiling, so it can carry heavier loads. In addition, flatbeds are often used for oversized cargo, which can be larger than the permitted dimensions or heavier than permitted weight. This requires special permission and sometimes even an escort of police cars. For the load security, carrying freight on a flatbed requires the driver to have special skills in securing the load. In addition to standard straps and locks, flatbed carriers use chains, winch straps, tarp cords, corner protectors, and so on. One of the most important elements of load protection for a flatbed is a tarp. Tarp is a large cover of heavy vinyl or polyester fabric that are used to cover freight. The main purpose of the tarp is to protect the product from rain, snow, mud, and any other elements of the road. It's important to note that a tarp does not protect against heat or cold. Usually when a dispatcher is negotiating a flatbed load, he or she will make sure to check with the broker if a tarp is required. Pulling a tarp can be quite a physical demanding job for the driver. Therefore, for a load with a tarp, you typically ask for a slightly higher price than without one. Okay, we did pretty well so far. We looked at the three main types of trailers: dry van, reefer, and flatbed. Most carriers use these type of trailers. Once you learn how to work with them, it won't be as hard to figure out how to work with the others. For information purposes, let's look at a couple other types. Step deck. Essentially, a step deck is a subcategory of a flatbed. The maximum height allowed for freight transported on a flatbed is 8 feet 6 inches. What if the product that needs to be moved exceeds the maximum height? Exceeding the maximum height will require the use of a specialized trailer known as a step deck. A step deck has all the same versatility as a flatbed, but has a lower deck to accommodate a higher height load. When using a step deck, the maximum height is increased by another 20 inches to 10 feet and 2 inches. Examples of loads carried on a step deck are tractors, agro-industrial equipment, drilling rigs, pressure tanks, compressor units, and so on. Basically anything that doesn't fit in a flatbed by height. Conestoga. Conestoga trailers are equipped with a roll-up tarp system which is used to cover and open the trailer and provide protection. The advantage of the Conestoga trailer is that the tarp can be tilted back in order to allow side loading and unloading. RGN, Removable Gooseneck Trailer. RGN is great for tall or long loads. The RGN trailer comes with a removable front end that allows the trailer to be lowered to the ground to create a ramp. It's capable of carrying loads up to 150,000 pounds. Of course, you have to get a special permit for this because we already know that the maximum allowed weight of a loaded truck on the US road is 80,000 pounds. Next one, car hauler. As the name suggests, these trailers are used for transporting cars. Modern car hauler trailers can be open or enclosed. Most commercial trailers have built-in ramps for loading and unloading vehicles, as well as a hydraulic system for raising and lowering the ramps for autonomous accessibility. Car haulers come in a variety of sizes and can hold anywhere from 2 to 10 vehicles. Car hauler carriers also often need the help of a remote dispatcher, because in order to get this trailer fully loaded, you need to find not one load, but arrange the pickup of multiple cars and multiple locations at once. However, the specifics of working with car haulers are different from other trailers we've looked at. This niche market has other brokers, other clients, and other platforms for finding loads. And the last type of equipment worth mentioning is a box truck. At the very beginning of the lesson I said that we're concentrating on working with Class 8 heavy semi-trucks and trailers attached to them. However, due to the specifics of today's market, it's worth talking about box trucks. Because of the shortage of tractors and trailers, as well as considerably low purchase cost, many carriers are investing in a box truck right now. A box truck, also known as a straight truck, has a separate compartment for freight which is separated from the front cabin where the driver sits. Behind the driver there could be a bed or additional storage depending on the class of the truck. They vary in lengths and can usually be from 12 to 32 feet. The most common type is a 26-foot box truck. The maximum gross weight for box truck is 26,000 pounds. The reason for this limit is that anything over 26,000 pounds requires a commercial driver's license to operate. So basically, a box truck is not only a cheaper alternative for a trucker, but it also does not require a special driver's license. The best use for box trucks is less than truckload or LTL trucking. Types of LTL loads include parcel delivery, mail delivery, furniture and perishable goods. Box trucks are also used to move household goods, deliver printed newspapers and transporting appliances. Basically, the owners of box trucks usually receive the license of common carriers of household goods. However, recently more and more of these trucks carry the same goods as your dry vans, just in smaller quantities. A typical 26-foot box truck can carry up to 12 pallets and up to 10,000 pounds of product. Many of these trucks do drive interstate, and you can find loads for them the same way you would find for a 53-foot dry van. Okay. To summarize, we've looked at two main types of trucks, semi-trucks and box trucks, and three most common types of trailers. Dry van, used mostly for carrying palletized loads, the reefer, used for carrying loads that require temperature control, and the flatbed, a platform which you can load large heavy loads with a forklift or a crane. And other less common types of trailers such as step deck, Conestoga, RGN, and car hauler. In the next lesson, we'll look at the mandatory documentation of a trucking company. You'll learn what a trucking license and tax form look like, what insurance is mandatory for carriers, and you'll get to know another silent player in the logistics market, factoring companies. Hey, you already got to the final lesson of this module. A dispatcher must be knowledgeable of the documentation of a trucking company. The good news is that there is nothing complicated about these documents at all. Working with documentation takes no more than 10% of a dispatcher's total work time. In the next module, when we get to the lesson on filling out paperwork for booking freight, we'll talk in more detail about contracts between the broker and the motor carrier, freight documents, weigh bills, and so on. In order for you to understand perfectly what we're talking about in that future lesson, we're going to take a quick look at the documents that every trucking company is required to have. These are the very documents that you will get from your new customer or employer when you start working with them. First of all, any trucker who owns a 10,000 pounds truck or larger and wants to transport freight between US states is required to have a DOT number and an MC number. The DOT number is a unique identification of the motor carrier registration with the US Department of Transportation. The FC number, or motor carrier number, is also a state operating license and a unique identifier assigned to transportation companies moving freight across state lines by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Association, FMCSA. Both the DOT number and the MC number can be found in a single document, called the MC certificate. This is a federal document that certifies a trucking company's compliance with the Code of Federal Regulations. This document certifies that the designated MC number is valid and belongs to the designated carrier in accordance with all operational and insurance requirements. The original of this document must be kept by the owner of the company, and a copy must be kept by each driver. The dispatcher will just need an electronic copy to forward to the broker when completing agreements. The next mandatory document is the Certificate of Insurance, abbreviated as COI. Before starting operations, the motor carrier must obtain an insurance policy. The Certificate of Insurance proves the existence of the policy and the terms of insurance. This document includes the following key information: the name and address of the insurance provider, name and address of the company that is insured, policy number, terms of insurance, types of insurance, coverage dollar amount, and additional insured parties. The minimum insurance policy requirements for carriers is $750,000 in automotive liability coverage and $100,000 in cargo liability coverage. Automotive liability protects the carrier from claims from third parties as a result of an accident, and cargo liability insures the freight that's being transported. The third most important document that every carrier and his or her dispatcher must have in order to work is a W-9 tax form. When you fill out a contract between your carrier and the broker you want to take the load from, you will definitely need to exchange these tax forms. What information is on the W-9 form? The first line shows the name of the company, the official name of the legal entity. Then the other name of the firm. It's used if the carrier operates under a brand name. Number 3 is the type of legal entity. Could be a sole proprietorship, limited liability company, corporation, and so on. Next, address where the company is registered. And the most important one is the tax number. Since all parties of agreement between the carrier and the broker are registered legal entities, they all have a tax number called an employer identification number. The exchange of tax numbers is the main reason for exchanging W-9 forms. Employer identification number, or EIN for short, is a unique 9-digit number assigned by the Internal Revenue Service to businesses for identification purposes. You as a dispatcher don't have to fill out these documents. Just like the MC certificate and certificate of insurance, you will receive these documents from the carrier before starting the operation, and you will use them for booking freight. It's as simple as that. But there is one more document we need to talk about today. But before we do, a little preface. In the trucking industry, according to standard payment terms, the carrier is paid by freight broker for the services rendered up to 30 days after the load has been delivered and invoice had been submitted to the broker. 30 days! This is a rather controversial practice because carriers need to pay for fuel and pay the drivers in advance. They need to incur all the risks associated with transporting, and then they have to wait a whole month to get paid. But, as the song goes, it is what it is. Not every small carrier has so much operating funds to wait for all the payments. This phenomenon has created a huge demand in this industry for the services of factoring companies. Essentially, factoring companies are banks that buy accounts receivables from carriers. They pay the money up front and then themselves wait for the delayed payment from the broker. In simple terms, they pay the carrier, take a small percentage, and then wait those 30 days for payment from the broker themselves. Kind of like a quick loan. If the motor carrier you're working with uses a factoring company, the broker you sign a contract with should be aware of this because he will have to pay to the factoring company and not the carrier directly. That's why a document confirming the relationship with the factoring company is also on the list of required documents that you should have with you before starting to work with each new carrier. Such a document is called Notice of Assignment, or NOA for short. A notice of assignment is a document used to inform debtors that a third party has bought their debt. So, that's it. All we have to do is to summarize. We've learned about 3 major documents which every carrier must have and must make available to their dispatcher in the form of an electronic copy. MC certificate, certificate of insurance, and the W-9 tax form. Plus notice of assignment, the 4th document you need if your carrier cooperates with a factoring company. Samples of these documents are made available for your review in the materials attached to this module. I'm glad you made it through this module. There was a lot of basic but extremely important information that will help you further in your learning process. We're gonna step away from the theoretical for a while and get deeper into the practical. I have a feeling that you're gonna love the next module. Don't forget to complete your homework, and I'll be waiting for you in Module 3. Good luck!